Hi there, this is Abel James, and welcome to the Fat Burning Man Show. I want to start off by thanking all you guys out there for making the Fat Burning Man Show one of the top podcasts in most English-speaking countries across the world. I just saw that we got number 7 in Finland the other day, so that's pretty exciting stuff. Well, anyway, I'm very excited to be here with Miss Shannon Ford here today, who's the reigning Mrs. United States. And Shannon's an outspoken advocate for the Celiac Foundation, and she endorses a gluten-free way of life and uses her lifestyle as a platform for encouraging healthy choices in her community. So Shannon and I talk about how foods that say that they're gluten-free are actually not, about Jillian Michaels and why she was wrong about healthy whole grains, how bacon is like dessert, and why low-fat paleo doesn't work. All right, cool, let's go hang out with Shannon. Well, we're here with the reigning 2011 Mrs. United States, Shannon Ford. Shannon, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. Can't complain.
Right on. So I just did this with Dan of Dan's Plan. I used to lead outdoor orientation trips, and we do something called a 2-minute bio. So why don't you tell us your story in about 2 minutes if you can?
Oh, wow. Okay.
I know it's hard.
Well, let's see. Well, I am 35 years old and born and raised in Miami, Florida, and grew up pretty with the typical sad, standard American diet. Grew up eating Dunkin' Donuts and fast food for dinner, but was very fortunate that I wasn't a fat kid by any means, and I was able to kind of, metabolize it. And but always was very active. I was a horseback rider, dancer. Was actually an NFL cheerleader for a year, and was Miss Florida USA in 2002. And then after that year was over, I also moved to New York City for 5 years, which I loved. I absolutely love New York City.
Yeah.
But turned 30, and it's a town for your 20s, not a town for your 30s, unless you're making a lot of money.
Yeah, and
so
staying up all night.
Back. Yeah, exactly. So moved back. Reconnected with my ex-boyfriend, who is now my husband.
Wow.
And that's 7 years broken up. And when right after we got engaged, my health started to deteriorate pretty rapidly. I am a human resources director, and I had to do a series of layoffs. And I had this very exciting moment of being engaged and planning a wedding, and then all of a sudden doing all these layoffs and the stress of that. My health started to deteriorate pretty rapidly and all of a sudden. And it took about 8 months of various tests, misdiagnosis, and I was finally diagnosed with celiac disease. Mm-hmm. So that, kind of led me on my path to health and to fitness, and kind of led me to paleo. And, kind of where I'm at today, and was the reason why I competed again in a pageant, because I hadn't competed in almost 10 years.
Wow.
I never didn't have any desire to compete again. It was something I did and was very proud of, but I had moved on. But when I got diagnosed and learned how to cope with the illness, and then also learn about going, completely grain-free and going paleo, I realized I had a voice, and I had a way to, if I could win the title, it gave me a platform on which to speak on. And my initial, we'll probably get more into this later. My initial focus was to focus on gluten-free labeling with the FDA,
right? And
which was the group 1 in 133. And then as my year has progressed, it has taken a little turn more towards the paleo diet and fitness and stuff. So that's, I don't know how long that took, but
that was perfect, Shannon. That was awesome.
Okay.
But let's talk a little bit more about celiac disease. For those out there, I think a lot of people have heard about it, but what exactly does it mean?
Celiac disease is an autoimmune disease where when I ingest gluten, my body fights the protein of gluten and will produce antibodies, and it attacks the wall of the intestine and prevents you from digesting any nutrients. Mm-hmm. So when I was actually fairly early on where I wasn't. One of the major symptoms is weight loss.
Right.
But first, there's weight gain, and I was still in that weight gain aspect because I was so inflamed. I had basically chronic systematic inflammation, and that's really what threw the doctors off because they're like, "No, that can't be it. You're gaining weight, and one of the major symptoms is weight loss." So that was when I'd heard about it, thought it was it. They just kind of, disregarded my concerns and, scheduled me for every other test. So, but that's it in a nutshell. And I think it's also important to realize that, and one of the focuses as I've gone across the country and speaking about gluten-free, and at these gluten-free expos, is that it's not just about celiac disease. There's also gluten sensitivity.
Yeah.
And that's more prevalent.
Very common.
And that's really what, even if I've seen people come up and they're like, "Oh, well, I can eat gluten. My test came back negative." I'm like, "Well, did you get tested for gluten sensitivity?" And I'm like, "No."
Yeah.
So that's really where I think our country is still really misguided, that they think that because a test came back negative for celiac disease, that they can eat gluten with no problem.
Right. Yeah, and it is a super common thing. I write a little bit about that in my book. And basically, unless you're a freak of nature, you are sensitive to modern wheat, at least, and modern wheat gluten. Some of the heirlooms are a little bit different, but you probably have read Wheat Belly.
I actually haven't.
Oh, really?
I have not. The first book that kind of got geared me towards health was actually Jillian Michaels' Master Your Metabolism.
Really?
And that was really where I threw out, all my high fructose corn syrup and anything with additives and kind of changed my diet. And that was about 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that was probably where I first started noticing because I was cleaning up my diet, starting to feel better. But then she talks about eating Ezekiel bread and eating good whole grains, because they're good for you. And then every time I'd eat them, I'd feel horrible. And I was still, look like I was 3 months pregnant.
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure out, I was just so, that was where, but that was really the first book that kind of got me just knowledgeable as far as what foods are healthy, and that, these additives, even though the FDA says they're safe, they're really not.
Yeah.
They're not something that our body should be ingesting. So,
right.
I think she's missed the boat on the gluten thing, but she does do a lot of good work as far as getting people to eat more clean.
Yeah, and get rid of processed foods.
Right.
Yeah,
that was the first book I read. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I was just talking to Rob Wolf yesterday, or the day before, rather. I just posted this interview, and we were talking a little bit about the Jillian Michaels thing. We're both trying to unseat her from the top podcast. We've been muscling her around.
Yes, I know. She's number one, isn't she? I have never listened to one of her podcasts, but
I have, and you know what? It's pretty good. I think you can get so far just cleaning up your diet, like you said, and taking out processed foods, because that automatically takes out so much junk and so many additives. And obviously wheat is the next step. So let's talk about that a little bit more. When you do eat wheat, was it something that you've always had an issue, or did it get progressively worse and you started falling apart a few years ago? Like, what was that journey like?
There usually is a trigger point where the trigger point is usually a stressful event, and that was exactly the case with myself.
Okay.
And, like I said, I had cleaned up my diet, based on the Jillian Michaels book. So then I started noticing more because I wasn't eating, crappy food. I was eating supposedly healthy food and eating clean, but I still was feeling, crappy.
Yeah.
So that's where it made me more aware of what I was feeling when I was eating certain foods. Mm-hmm. But like I said, it was that time, and it was the beginning of 2009, and I got engaged, and then 2 days later, I went on a cross-country tour for 2 weeks across the different offices of my company, laying off people.
Oh my gosh!
And it was 7 different cities in 2 weeks. So I had this high, then this low of just really affecting people's lives, and it takes a toll because some of these people were friends, and then flew out to, in between the trip, flew out in San Francisco for the weekend. Mm-hmm. My then fiance met me out there, pretty much a free trip in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So he met me out there, and we had a nice weekend together. So there's another high, and then I go back to the next week and started laying off people again. So then there was another low. And then just the toll of traveling so much takes a toll on my body. Mm-hmm. And then literally that next week, I thought I was fatigued and thought I was just tired. So I remember taking a couple of days off and then just never got back. Like I was never able to regroup. And that's really where the chronic fatigue started. And, just all the symptoms were just got severely worse and fairly quickly.
Yeah.
My resting heart rate was 35 beats per minute, which
Wow.
unless you're Lance Armstrong, it's not normal.
Yeah.
I would
Jeez.
literally just fall asleep at my desk. So it was a tough time, and having to tell my boss at the time, saying, something's going on. I just don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I had a great boss who was very supportive and let me go to doctor's appointments, because I was going to see like different cardiologists and just so many different doctors, and them all telling me there's nothing wrong with you. So, and I'm saying I'm gaining weight, but I was still relatively thinner compared to other women that were probably 33.
Okay.
I think my body fat percentage at that time was probably 24, 25.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, but you're normal. I'm like, but this isn't normal for me.
Right.
And because I fell in the normal range, they just thought I was just being, well, you're getting older, you're going to start gaining weight. Just like, no, it's not a good enough answer. So, and then it was my husband who saw an interview. We were actually watching TV, saw an interview with Elizabeth Hasselbeck talking about her book, The G-Free Diet, had just come out, and she was promoting it, and she talked about the symptoms. And one of the things she said was, I would always look like I was 3 months pregnant. And my husband, and that was the joke with my husband and I. Every time I'd eat pasta or pizza, we'd always nickname my belly baby pasta, baby pizza, because I would literally just look like I was pregnant. And we just kind of looked at each other going, wow. And he goes, that's you. You got to find that out. Got on my computer, started Googling it, looking it up. And, but then it was trying to convince the doctors was the hardest thing, because it was 3 months after that I was diagnosed, that I finally got the test run, because the doctors thought I was crazy.
3 months.
So,
wow.
Yeah. Yep. So
that's wild.
I started playing with eliminating gluten on my own and instantly felt better.
Yeah.
And how I came about going into the 1 in 133 organization was, once I started figuring out and learning the hard way that gluten is pretty much in everything. I mean, it's not in just, I told somebody the other day, I'm like, well, the pasta, the bread, that's the easy stuff. That's the stuff that's the no-brainer.
Yeah.
It's the stuff where I had told, for example, I went to lunch the other day with someone from our Minneapolis office, and I told the waitress, it's a restaurant I visit quite often, and I always order the same thing. I kind of just know the drill. And I said, I'm gluten-free. I'm allergic to gluten. Please no, and she's like, okay, no problem. Sure enough, she comes and the sauce is all over it. It was the natural juices, but the natural juices, of course, mixed with flour. And she goes, no, it's the natural juices. I'm like, I'm pretty sure there's flour in it. And sure enough, but I knew that because I visited this restaurant and I had talked to the chef before. Yeah. So I knew the drill. But someone who hadn't, wouldn't know that. And that's the stuff that you have to watch out for. And that's the stuff that you have to be proactive for.
And almost anything in a box these days, it seems like, has some form of wheat in it. So what are some other sources of gluten where you wouldn't necessarily expect it?
Well, the issue is not the wheat, because wheat is usually is contained. It's one of the 7 major allergens. So wheat is usually identified. It's the other rye and barley, or the modified food starch, which is, in my mind, a question mark, which to me just says gluten. If it's modified food starch, it's gluten. Just avoid it. So, in the beginning, now I just avoid anything that comes in a box. But, in the beginning,
that's good advice,
I would eat. Right. And in the beginning, that's I wouldn't know. And wheat, I would look, but I didn't know that, modified food starch probably meant gluten. Maltodextrin was probably something, sometimes has gluten in it, even though it's, derived from corn sometimes. But, you just have to be careful with those things. Soy sauce. Who knew about soy sauce? That was clueless to me. Yeah. And I'd go to, sushi restaurants and then also the surimi. I'd order a sushi roll, and the surimi, the imitation crab, that's what binds it together, is gluten. So you can't have that. Yeah. So those